Everybody, welcome to really a special topic tonight. This is something that I think is really timely and really relevant, and kind of like the time to really go into and explore what's happening in education. I made a video. This is all coming from a video I made. This is a very meant to be very laid back discussion. It's a discussion that you're meant to engage in, right? So if you're watching this at any point, even if you are catching this after it has been recorded and it's on a stream, whether you're catching it on Facebook or YouTube or in a group, please feel free to still make comments and interact. So I made a video that talked about standardized testing and my disappointment in the Biden administration around standardized testing, although it really wasn't the Biden administration. That's something we'll talk about as we go on. And I received a comment from this young man right here, Henderson Maddox. Henderson, I'm going to interview Henderson, tell you who he is, made a comment that really was what I think is the opposite argument. That many people commented very favorable things about my opposition to testing, although the reality is many educators don't feel that way. Many people in society don't feel that way. And so I really think it's definitely worth a bigger conversation. Henderson, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good, doing great. How you doing?
I'm good. Welcome. Henderson, just very briefly, you are now in the world of radio, television, and film. You're a producer, and you live. Do you live in LA? Or are you back here in Atlanta?
I live in Atlanta. I'm actually at Atlantic Station, so I live in Atlanta.
Okay, so you're in Atlanta. You served although you're right now in the entertainment industry, you have an educational experience background where you served in the public school system for 8 years.
Yes, sir.
And, and that's why, I was really excited to talk to you and engage with you. I want to know, just in the very beginning, why do you feel standardized tests are needed, especially during this year? Why do you feel mandated tests are needed?
I think that the purpose of before we get into the problems of it, the purpose of standardized tests is to show progress. It's to have an exclusive opportunity to across the board to analyze data, to let us know where students are, where they need improvement in, and where there may be some gaps in the curriculum or in the classroom with certain subjects or certain benchmarks. So I think right now, with it being a pandemic and we hear over and over again on the news that kids are falling behind and this and the third, this is the ideal time for us to use these tests to figure out, okay, well, let's figure out where Johnny is, because in August, when we're hopefully, breathing and we're back in the classroom and everything's back to normal, we got to get Johnny caught up. How can we get Johnny caught up if we don't have that, those benchmarks or, that data to know where Johnny is? Now, of course, there's other measures that we can take, but I think this is the biggest measure that can be a situation to where it's what is the word I'm trying to use? Where it's just, it's the same across the board, across everywhere.
Where it's equitable, where it's fair.
Yes, where it's fair.
So, you know what? I think that you make a great point, right? And I believe that many people will say that. As a matter of fact, I've done a lot of reading about this topic before I make the video. And that's the number one argument that's being made by the Department of Education under Rosenfeld. I want to say his first name is John Rosenfeld, but I just know the last name is Rosenfeld. And he is the acting Secretary of Education, who was appointed by Betsy DeVos, and Betsy DeVos, of course, being appointed by Donald Trump. The actual decision to give state-mandated tests didn't come from Joe Biden or Joe Biden's Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona. Cardona didn't take, it wasn't confirmed until Monday. I would assume that he started work either that same day or maybe on Tuesday. The decision for this came in mid-February, I think around the 15th, February 14th, 15th is when this actual announcement was made. Henderson, this is my question, and actually Sarinthia beat me to it. How are you doing, my friend? Cannot formative measurements serve as a means of measuring progress? And that's, I think, a big part of why so many educators are concerned, is that the Department of Education is saying that we need data and we need to have measurements right now, but there's so many ways of measuring kids. Do we really need a standardized test to tell us what we already know? We know that kids are behind. We know that teachers are overwhelmed. We know there's a lot of work to be done. do we need to go through the stress and pressures of standardized tests and when we know what society is going to do with those results?
I think that, formative assessment is great, but formative assessment has the opportunity to be altered for a particular environment. And when a student goes into the real world, they're not competing with a particular environment, they're competing with the world. So again, a standardized test and a test that is taken nationwide, or district wide or whatever, it puts everybody at this this equal playing field as far as when they take the test. And they may not be successful as other districts or other areas, but it gives you the opportunity to start at this, at a said line. So that's my biggest thing, is that formative assessments, that's just okay, me in my department, in my classroom, you know what I'm saying? Being able to say, okay, this is what I'm teaching. Let me figure out if you know it. Let me give you this. Let me give you this hands-on training. Let me get you this exercise to do this. But at the end of the day, we have to have, if we're preparing, our goal as educators is to prepare these students for the real world, prepare them for college and other post-secondary options. They have to get in these places and compete with people who have had more resources, and more things. And so our goal is to try to get them as close to, everybody else in the world as we can. And I just feel like that in certain, I worked in Atlanta public schools where, in my district, just being behind with books and materials and certain things just definitely held us back or whatnot. And I think that is what the bigger issue is. I think that there are issues with standardized tests, but again, I just feel like there's other issues that are within the community and within the school system that need to be addressed. Outside of it, we can't just point the finger at a standard test.
Yeah, I think, and that's what I want. I want to hear all of it, and I want you to ask me questions too, right? Like, feel free at any point to ask me any questions. You absolutely hit on the fact that we are living in a world that is disparate, and we have a lot of inequity, especially in regards to education, and that the education of Black and brown children is a result of systemic oppression. That what our kids are getting in their educational experiences, whether they are in predominantly Black and brown schools or whether or not in their predominantly white schools, no matter what schools they're in, they are not being educated at the rate in which they should be educated. They're not being exposed to the level of education should be exposed to. And if I'm right, you're saying that standardized testing gives a fair and equal measure across the board so that we know what's really happening for those kids.
Exactly.
But here's the opposite. Okay, give me your although, because this is what I was gonna say, is that the opposite argument is that we have been doing this failed attempt to measure achievement for these kids for over 20 years since No Child Left Behind, and we still have those gaps. We still haven't made the appropriate progress for these children, but what we have done is we have created what I believe to be a false narrative around the value of testing and around the value of the children as a whole. I don't believe in standardized testing anymore. And I want to go on record and make a very, apologetic, I need to make a whole video apologizing to every child I taught, right? Because I was a master teacher, and I regret every moment of that. And I say that because I was doing exactly what I was taught to do to be the master teacher. I wanted to have the highest test scores in my content area, not only in my building, but in the whole entire district. If I taught, I wanted the highest SAT scores for my students. I wanted the highest ACT scores for my students, and I wanted the highest AP language scores for my students. And in that process, great learning occurred, I hope, but I don't know if great fun was had. I don't know if I agree that the purpose of education is to prepare kids for the real world anymore. I believe the purpose of education is to fully help people be the best versions of who they are, period. And that leads to success in your chosen career field. So often, especially for Black and brown kids, we are looking at and living up to the expectations of Booker T. Du Bois. Of Booker T. Washington, instead of living up to W.E.B. Du Bois. We're not letting children live in their talent, live in their skills. We're ramming, and forcing them to focus on a future that isn't even real. I don't think Henderson, none of this is real. I don't necessarily know to what extent learning loss is exceptionally valid, because we create these constructs. We, the adults, we make these things up. If learning loss occurred, then push back the standards or push back the measurement and let kids learn from where they are and grow from there. Education isn't finite. We never stop learning. We never stop learning. So the notion that there is a curriculum that has to be covered, the notion that there is an amount of knowledge that has to be gained in a set period of time, to me, is false.
And I feel what you're saying with that, but I feel like that is a different battle, because that is a battle of education and the structure of education and how it's been for so long. But at the same time, it's almost like, okay, so I taught an APS when the cheating scandal happened. So I had kids that were in my classroom that couldn't pass the graduation test. I didn't teach a class that had anything to do with the graduation test. But I found myself helping kids to prepare for the graduation test. But it was these kids that were pushed along through all these years, that had a domino effect to where now they can't even pass a basic skills test. Knowledge that really, you pretty much have most of it by your sophomore year. You know what I'm saying? For the most part, to pass, with the exception of, maybe a couple benchmarks, whatever that you learn, after that. So I think that's what I think the issue is. And for me, I feel like we have to standardize tests, for me, hold people accountable, because when I work in a building, I see teachers who are not doing their job.
That's true.
Or not servicing the kids to where they're supposed to be. How do we hold those teachers accountable?
And that, Cynthia, did you hear that? Like, that is where I'm stuck. That's the only part of it that I agree with, Henderson. I agree 100% with that, right? Like, I was doing all I could in my classroom, and I had people across the street showing movies once a week. Every Friday was movie day in the classroom across the hall. What can what if you don't have the high stakes test? Because that's the only part that I get stuck in, because I don't want standardized tests. What I want is a continuum of assessments that really build up to being a valid measurement of a student's growth on what they determine to be valid. Like, you are in the arts and entertainment. How you would get evaluated in your learning experience should not be the same as someone who may have an aspiration to go into medical school, or who may have a natural talent towards math and science. Your natural talent should be evaluated perhaps through judge and jury style, through portfolio-based assessments, through a compilation of the work that you do. That's what I want to see schools move towards in the next generation, right? Like, it ain't gonna happen in my lifetime, but it could happen in the lifetime of my great nieces and nephews. But it won't happen if we don't start here. But the holdup is, what can we do in a world where standardized tests don't exist to ensure accountability? Because I grew up in rural Mississippi. In rural Mississippi, the teachers taught what they wanted to teach. I had a teacher, God rest her soul. I won't say her name, but God rest her soul. She was my teacher in 9th grade, 3rd period, right before lunch. And she was my teacher in 12th grade, 3rd period, right before lunch. And she would send kids to the gas station across the street to get her a chicken snack box. In the country, you would have a chicken snack box. So we would bring her a 2-piece dark meat with a biscuit and what we call potato logs, or they call them potato logs in the country. And she would eat it in front of us while gossiping about who was doing what. Now, while this was going on, I didn't go to the stove for her. Nor did I gossip and talk to her, because I didn't like her, because I knew what she was doing. I would be sitting in the corner with my friends talking, or when she told me to shut up because I talked too much with my friends, I would be reading a book. Like, I would be reading Toni Morrison or James Baldwin or whatever it was at that time. But standardized testing would have stopped that. It could have led to administrators, someone who cared about me, knowing this is what this teacher was doing. So I'm torn there. That's where I'm torn. I constantly say every teacher, sadly, isn't a great teacher.
Exactly. That is the biggest issue, is that every teacher is not a great issue. And so you cannot, we have a situation to where we have these students that are deprived because they don't have good teachers. Like, at the end of the day, I consider myself a good teacher. Like, I had a pathway assessment. I felt like my standardized test was a little bit harder than, some of the other teachers, only because whereas if you teach a class in a semester or a year, you take your test at the end of the year. My test came at the end of 4 years. So these students had to, remember this knowledge from their 9th grade all the way up to senior year.
Your career pathway assessment is what
exactly
in Georgia education, career pathway assessment.
So, but when I left, I had an 85% pass rate. But I had to, when I came into the I'm gonna say can I say the name of the school?
You can, yeah.
Okay. All right. So when I came into Maynard Jackson, I taught at Maynard Jackson. There was less than a 10% pass rate on the pathway assessment when I came in. And it was a situation to where it was like, I knew that this was important because I know how to have fun. I know how to make sure that to grasp that the students are learning what they're doing, that, they're demonstrating, I knew how to do all of that. But at the same time, I needed to make sure that they could compete with the other people, with how they learn or whatever. And those basic benchmarks that the state says, this is what the student needs to get in your class. And so people argue and they say, oh, well, some people don't like to teach the test. But I taught the test. I broke up my curriculum. I incorporated all the fun stuff and everything else. Like, we went on field trips like 2 times a month, to film stuff or whatever. But I taught the test throughout those 4 years. And then that senior year, I really, hammered in again and went back over everything that they've learned. And it takes teachers to do those things to set up a student for success. At the end of the day, if you're giving me a standardized test which is based off of my curriculum and it's based off of benchmarks, then I have to go back then and set up my curriculum throughout the year for those things. I can incorporate my fun stuff. I can incorporate projects and, other things to make the learning, fun for the students. But at the end of the day, that's the most important thing, because even if we get rid of the tests, right? The purpose of me teaching the student is to teach to make sure they learn this knowledge of this curriculum and they meet these benchmarks. So ultimately, I think that, so a part of the other issue that I was getting ready to get to is that we have to ask ourselves, is the curriculum in my classroom aligned with the standardized test? And if it's not, how do we work to fill that gap? Because I think a portion of that gap is in some areas they teach the test. In certain areas they don't. Their curriculum is off. But who is in this district mandating to say, hey, your curriculum is a little to the left here, buddy? You know what I'm saying?
That was me. That was what I was doing before I left, the public sector. I agree with that. And Cerinthia, then, Cerinthia made a good point about accountability is a leadership challenge for sure. Yeah. So let's reevaluate how we measure the teacher effectiveness. A measure of student growth is more valid predictor of student success than a scale score. But then, is that also still not a test? Is student growth still not measured by a test? How do we move away from the whole entire testing experience? And here's one of my former students, right? So I just talked about you, Lydia, earlier when I apologized and said that my life in the classroom was way too test focused for no reason. There was no point in it. And she said, we're living in an interesting time for this specific conversation. The pandemic has created an uncharted realm in which parents have been primary educators. The parents themselves, yes, have taken on a much bigger role in the pandemic. Because of that, are these standardized tests analyzing the intellect and knowledge of the student taking the test, or the parents that have been teaching their kids? Because, and that's right, if it's the parents, it becomes an even bigger equity issue, because those families that are privileged enough to have a caregiver or provider at home with the child are going to outperform those poor babies who didn't have that opportunity or that privilege. It's a real, it's a real issue. I'm very torn. Again, what can we do to measure growth, Cerinthia, without a test? And
I guess my question is too, and this is for you, would you feel better if, like, because at the end of the day, I guess this has been a pandemic year. So people's finances have been off, life has just been off. So how do we, is it a situation to where we need to say, hey, let's figure out the purpose of the data that we're using this year, because we know this data is going to be off. You know what I'm saying? So we don't have to necessarily put this person in a remedial class or remedial this or remedial that because of these test results. But can we use this data this year to help us, prepare, like I said, prepare us for better virtual learning environments.
This I can tell you what I want to see, right? Like, I can tell you, because I'm ready. I'm ready for Joe Biden. Joe, pick up the phone now. Pick up the phone, Joe, and give me a call. You can make me your assistant secretary of education. I'll tell you what I'll do right after that. Number one, this is what should have happened in education as a whole, is this should have been a moment of extreme and unprecedented innovation. With the amount of money being given to schools in the first two rounds of CARES Act, the first round was about immediate emergency adjustments and learning. The second round was about preparing schools to be safe and also about trying to give some level of equity in the field to the discrepancies that we talked about earlier with the parent at home and those who don't have parents at home. The third wave could be about the innovation. We could be talking about and really putting money into how can school systems innovate to really come up with creative ways of measuring student learning, and then how can states as a whole also measure student learning so that we still have levels of accountability that are in place and that are present. I believe that students across the board need to have greater agency at younger ages to determine the curriculum that's going to benefit their own personal goals in learning. If you want to learn about dinosaurs, you should be learning about dinosaurs. If you want to learn about quantum physics, you should be learning about quantum physics. There's a level of student voice and agency that we don't give to kids, and it's only making adults exist who don't care about facts, who want to be told what's right, not necessarily want to research what's right and know it to be true for themselves, and who lack the creativity and critical thinking skills and communication skills that really will lead to true 21st century success. Cynthia has a few good points. Cynthia said to us, have we had the opportunity to study successful jurisdictions around the world? Estonia, for example, has totally transformed their system in less than 50 years and is now one of the most successful education systems in the world. According to international assessments, their success has nothing to do with an assessment. I have not studied Estonia. It's definitely something that I'm going to research and look into because I would like to know more about that. And also, Henderson, you are proposing age-old antidotes to solve new age dilemmas?
Well, we get to the point to where I think the common denominator is, and what people fail to realize, because especially us that are good educators, the common denominator is that there are teachers, there are people who are not doing their job, and not just teachers.
And we got to address that. Like, that's that's tough.
That is the biggest. That's the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing because you ask yourself. I'm a firm believer that now some people may need a little extra help, but if Billy could do it, Johnny could do it. The question is how do we get them there? And because we have a system to where you have teacher burnout, because I ain't gonna lie, by year 6, year 5, I felt like I was working the chain gang. Like, how can I get up out this thing? Whatever. But being. Do
you feel that good teachers are the ones who burn out?
I think all teachers do. I'm not even going to just say good teachers, because I say some people I know people that ended up in the classroom because and I hate to put it like this, because they didn't have anything else to do, and they had a degree, and there was their degree aligned with some class, that they could teach and they could get a job. They needed a job. They needed a future. I know a lot of people that are in education because of that. And to be honest with you, although I enjoyed teaching, and, I was one of those people. I went to college. I majored in film. I had a film degree. I was going into the film industry, and I was presented with an opportunity because I needed. I said I got to the point where I was like, I need a job, I need benefits, I need this. I had a love for education from, working my work study program in college, the No Child Left Behind program. I worked in elementary school, so I had a love for kids. But a lot of people, like myself, fall into education just because you need to make ends meet and you need to be able to provide, but not really realizing the importance of what the job you're doing. And I think, this is the reason why we have assessments, because it's not just about the child, it's about the whole entire learning environment. Unfortunately, if we can make robots, or some type of way that we knew that everybody in every classroom was, was doing similar situations and teaching these children in similar ways to where it was common across the board, then I think okay, yeah, we can try to get away with, certain things, but we can't. Because how can we hold these people accountable? What other ways can we hold these people accountable? And you think about it, and I'm not just saying like on a school, a district level. I'm talking about a country level, around the country, because ultimately, when you leave primary education, you are going into the world to be successful at whatever it is you want to be successful at, and you have to compete with people in the world. So no matter what, we are preparing you to compete. If you want to be an automotive mechanic, you are competing with another automotive mechanic to be the best one there is out there. And it is what it is. So how do we do that? How do we have that accountability? How do we have that accountability to make sure that people are preparing? And I think that's the issue. And I think that, again, a lot of times we point at the test because some people don't test well, and at the end of the day, it's like the test is the enemy, but it's like, is the test really the enemy, or is the test the tool? Let's use the test as the tool and understand.
I agree with that.
And even if we have to get more involved with the test, like I said, if you're teaching what's on the test, and a student is falling behind, there's certain areas that, okay, maybe I need to change how I'm teaching this. Maybe I need to come to a different approach on how I'm teaching this. Maybe I can help, maybe I need to reinforce this more. Or I'm spending too much
happening in the classroom along the way anyway, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, teachers need to be every day looking at what kids learned,
exactly,
what they didn't learn based on how the teacher delivered it, and then adjusting it accordingly to really figure out and drill down to how or what went wrong so they can fix it before the end. The issue is that the state mandated assessment is seen as the end, right? Like that's the summative. And it's used in very negative ways to measure performance to be either good or not good, for accountability and to measure achievement. But I just don't know if either one of those are, appropriate.
And you know what? And I agree with you. And I think my thing is, they need to be, I'm touching my words. Are we using the data to go back and help Johnny?
Well,
or are we just using the data to say that Mr. Maddox did not do what he's supposed to do to help Johnny?
Well, that's unfortunately some very weak leaders use the data to say what the teacher is or isn't doing, which is flawed.
Exactly.
Then some mid-range leaders look at the data to say what a child knows and doesn't know. An exemplary leader is sitting here looking at multiple data sources, not just a standardized test, not just teacher input, not just even student perception, but multiple things to say this is a true picture of Johnny. Because all those things give you a picture. What Johnny is doing in a classroom that you can observe with your eyes is like the video clip. But even with a video clip, I might look good today, or I might not look good today. The house might be clean, or the house may be dirty, because I'm determining how that goes, even in my video. So you have the video of Johnny, then you have the test, which is a school picture day. Johnny's mama washed him up and brushed his teeth and combed his hair for school pictures. And maybe he had a good smile. Maybe he didn't have a good smile today. Maybe it was the braces year. Maybe the braces were off. Maybe the braces hadn't yet come on. And that's what the image we're going to get of him at in the summative test, the state mandated test, school picture day. But then you also have Johnny taking selfies along the way. That's what you get from the tests and the quizzes and the portfolios and the projects that Johnny is doing throughout the year. Those are the selfies. Some selfie he takes look great because the lighting was hidden. Other selfies don't look so good, and he doesn't even want to post those selfies because they didn't look good. And all of those things come together to give you the real picture of how this student learned. And that's what I want to see as the way we measure real achievement for students. That is, to me, the answer. This continuum of assessments. And to me, for President Biden to even allow, because it's not too late. Oh, I thought I would share. Hold on, let me share my other screen part. Let me go over something must have happened in my look at my share, because I have a little PowerPoint over here to share. President Biden can stop state tests right now. He could say you don't have to give your state mandated assessment because it is a state test, not a national test, if your state opts to not do so. I feel as though he needs to do it for this year. And if he doesn't do it, I think that he's making a big political mistake for the Democratic Party. Because I don't really think many people look to Joe Biden to run again at age 82. He might run again, but I think that he's going to hurt Democrats across the country because teachers are such a loyal bloc. I think if there's ever a year to give grace around state tests, which I don't believe in anyway, this might be the year.
So let me ask you this though. If let's say the city of Atlanta, I mean, they say, okay, you don't have to do standardized tests. And then city of Atlanta says, okay, we're not going to do standardized tests. What are you going to do to help to figure out where Johnny is in August?
Well, here's the thing. So I'm going to answer that question from 2 vantage points. In Atlanta public schools, they are giving right now benchmarks that people don't want to give, but they're giving them, right? In the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, where I used to work, the content coordinators create assessments for teachers to measure and use in their classrooms. So those benchmarks are given, they're digitally developed benchmarks. Schools are still giving the teacher developed assessments that they've created also to kids to measure performance and progress. And you also have other assessments. I know in Atlanta Public Schools, they use what's called the STAR Screener, an assessment to progress monitor along the way. Some school systems use what's called MAP, the NWEA MAP assessment. But there are tons of assessments out there that school systems pay for to give additional looks to prepare for the big test. Those things are still happening, in addition to the tests that teachers are giving. So in Atlanta Public Schools and in many big school systems, that's happening. But what's happening in those smaller, more rural school systems where you may not have those infrastructures in place to give those kind of tests, that's where I worry that you're going to possibly have not the same level of assessment and measuring of kids happening, and you might end up not knowing clear baseline about where kids are because of the pandemic.
Now, let me ask you this. If we did give standardized tests, right? What are you afraid of happening with this data?
You know what? Good question. That is a great question. What am I? I'm afraid of the data being misused to undercut the profession of teachers. Number one, teachers have worked very hard with very hard circumstances, period. They were forced into an emergency learning situation that they shouldn't have been forced into. The federal government, under the failed leadership of twice impeached President Donald J. Trump, failed to alert this country to the dangers of the coronavirus pandemic and failed to take appropriate action to keep the people in this country safe. In states like Georgia, where the erroneous, moronic, idiot governor Brian Kemp is our state leader, things went even worse than where they went in some other states. So because of a failure of leadership, teachers found a way still to go. Some people went with a 2 days notice from in their classroom to in their living room teaching children but they made it work. I believe that state mandated tests are going to then portray these hardworking educators in systems where kids come in the door already behind as not being effective, as not being good, as not doing what they should have done. Whereas there are schools, and like I know, in a place like Atlanta Public Schools, where some kids come into kindergarten and they've never had an adult talk to them. Now, they've heard adults speak. They've heard adults talk at them, but they've never heard an adult talk to them. Some kids experience that in some school systems. And so these kids are way behind. We're working very hard to bring them up. But then you have some school systems where kids are coming in, or some households where kids come in where they did have that caregiver at home, or their parents paid for a nanny to do it, or their parents could have grandma do it. Somebody was helping them out doing it. I'm afraid that data will show that those kids, they taught over here in X school system, but they weren't teaching in A school system. And there are a whole continuum of factors that contribute to those results. Then I'm afraid that's going to become the media narrative. Then you're going to have the false battle of failure affecting these kids when that's not the case. It's not failure on the part of teachers or parents or kids. It's failure on the part of a whole lot of other factors like systemic oppression, racism, failed government. That's what I'm afraid of. Then you're going to have either a flood of money trying to solve a problem instead of policy being used to solve the problem, or the opposite, where they're going to try to cut funds and then make hard decisions like closing schools, which hurt neighborhoods and hurt the profession as a whole. Those are the things that I'm afraid of. Because again, the answer from the state and federal government for failing schools is let's give them more money, instead of giving them better policies to fix the problem. And that's my fear.
So I guess I can identify now what the problem is, but I guess with me, I'm trying to formulate. I'm a problem solution type of person. And so I'm asking myself, well, how do we come up with a solution? How can we meet in the middle?
Yep. Let's figure this out. I want to know too.
How can we meet in the middle to be able to get this data, but have them understand that, hey, it's a world pandemic. We're not going to use this data the way we used to use this data, but we're going to internally do that.
You know what? We have to do that. We have to be in complete control of the narrative. Educators and people who care about educators, whether you're a teacher, an administrator, a parent, a community activist, that's exactly what we need, is to get out here and shape the narrative. And we have a little bit of that, happening. And it comes into social media. It comes into conversations like this. It comes into educating as many people as we can. Here's a tweet that I saw on Twitter, and it says, "Trust is important to you. Dear Joe Biden, trust is important to you. It is to students and teachers too. You've broken that trust by supporting standardized testing. Scratch the surface and we see your corporate beliefs. It's not too late to #cancel the test. Signed, the most vulnerable." Now, here's the thing. I don't necessarily believe or can say that Joe Biden has broken his promise, but this is the kind of push that needs to happen to change the narrative. Is it a narrative of cancel the test, or is it a narrative of using the data only to inform instruction? Maybe you give the test, but maybe the test isn't allowed to become public knowledge. Maybe the test is something that is only between the student, the teacher, and the school system decides how they use that data, that it doesn't get reported to the AJC, that it doesn't hit the news, that parents don't sit around at the ballpark arguing and complaining about how great their child did or how poor their child did. How you doing, Candy? Maybe that's a part of the answer.
I agree with you. I think that is a big push toward the solution, because I think that at the end of the day, we need some sort of assessment that can be common, equal across the board, point blank period. Because we don't live in a society to where, like you said, every student has the same resources, every teacher has the same motivation to do so. So it's like we need to test enough to at least so we can improve. Because my thing is, my biggest thing is if this pandemic came out of nowhere. So in 5 years, 10 years, forbid me for saying it, if it happens again, what are we going to do to make sure that we're prepared? What are we going to do to make sure we're ready in education? Because just like the song say, the children are our future. And it's funny, but you know what I'm saying? But what are we going to do? Because these are our future. So what are we going to do to make sure that that this doesn't happen again?
Answer number one is internet access for every American, no matter where you are in the country, no matter what rural part of the world you live in, no matter what city you live in, no matter what zip code in the city. Internet access on the Bluff should be just as strong and just as viable as internet access in Buckhead. Internet access on the dirt road in Mississippi where I grew up needs to be just as strong and just as robust as the internet access in the capital city of Jackson. That is step number one. Step number two is educators cannot lose or forget the lessons they learned in the pandemic. Everything that happens in the face-to-face classroom needs to be accessible digitally, so that kids can then use those tools that we're giving them. We are way behind the curve in terms of using technology. So let's go ahead and finally move education into a bright, technologically enhanced and enabled future. Those are two clear ways that we can be prepared for something that could interrupt school. And this could be relevant and used even if you have something like a snow day that interrupts school, where kids just can't get to school. That's going to be a huge benefit. Candy asks, are they penalizing kids who failed the test this year? If anything, this should be a test to measure how far they are behind. And that's what, Henderson is arguing. No, they're not going to use a test to penalize kids that we know of, not in direct ways. Kids won't be necessarily held behind. But here's the reality. Kids will be penalized with this data because of teachers' bias. If I'm a teacher and I get 17 kids out of 20 who failed the state test last year, how am I going to respond to those kids? If I'm a teacher and then my neighbor across the hall, you got 20 kids, but only 3 of them failed the state test, and 17 of them passed. Those are the kinds of judgments teachers make about kids and perceptions they have of kids that hurt the child before they even walk in the door. And that's a practice that's common and encouraged because they want you to know the data and know the child, before they walk in. Another article that I did read, Henderson, as we get ready to kind of slide to the conclusion, was this one, is that standardized tests have never been valid or reliable measures of what students know and are able to do, and they are especially unreliable. Now is that a lot of the data at least this article from the Huffington Post argued is that the data will not be valid. The data won't be true this year because of the pandemic. But even with that, should we still test? And I'm hearing that you're saying we got to have something.
We got to have something. We have to. We have to have something. But I think that the issue is to make sure that we're using this data in the correct way that do not harm our students, do not harm our teachers. But the data, no matter what, it should be used always to help improve education.
Period.
And that's the biggest thing. A teacher doesn't need to get fired, because of X, Y, and Z, this is the third or whatever. Because my thing is, and I mean, I guess this is it's so a layered situation. It's so many layers to this, because at the end of the day, it's administration can't just rely on standardized tests and say, oh, this teacher ain't doing their job. You failed a test 3 years in a row. Get out of here. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
You can't do that, because as an administrator, it's so much going on in the school, but we have to change the way schools work, because there needs to be a better checks and balances system inside the school, an interpersonal, checks and balance system. Just like you have, instructional coaches that, I think my last few years at Jackson, we had so many instructional coaches, and everybody's like, why we got all these instructional coaches walking around here? But you can have these more people to go inside the classrooms and actually witness what's happening, You know what I'm saying? To be able to make their own data or make their own analysis based on their expertise. Hopefully they were hired there not because they're friends with the principal, but because they actually have an expertise in that field, and use that. So it's so many different layers to it that it's so much need to be. It's so much need. I mean, we'll be talking for 12 hours if we really break down education and everything that needs to be fixed. You know what I'm saying? And honestly, I feel like as much as people want to say standardized tests do not work, at the same time, I feel like a part of me feels like standardized tests is all we have, in a sense, because everybody's not a great teacher like you. You know what I'm saying? And like the other young lady who was like, everybody's not a great teacher. Everybody's not a great administrator. You know what I'm saying? Everybody's not a great instructional coach, you know? So it's like we have to, if we want to replace standardized tests, okay, great. We have to replace the system because, and what I did when I left, I made a movie, and the movie was called Deficiency Notice. So, because, you know, when a student is falling behind, as a teacher, we give them a deficiency notice. It takes it home to their parents and shows the areas that they're deficient. And this is
that's right.
But the message of the movie, you know, I broke down, you know, not really the cheating scandal, but the effects of the cheating scandal on our kids. And at the end of the day, because I quit education, moved on. But my character at the end, he sits down and he writes a letter, but the letter is a deficiency notice to the district. Who's giving a deficiency notice to the system?
Like who's letting the system know that they're failing?
Exactly, because the system wants to point the finger and say, "Oh, this teacher's failing, that student's failing."
That's what the AJC will say that they're doing. That's what the media says that they're doing. But when they do it, it's unfair because they don't have the full picture in front of them. Use the information, even when you give them the right information.
You're not in my classroom. Yeah, you're not in my classroom to write. You're gonna write an article. You know what I'm saying? You're not in my classroom. You don't know that I'm teaching. When I was teaching at Carver, kids was coming to school with guns, and I was more concerned with making sure that my kids were gonna be safe and that my classroom was safe and that I was gonna make it home, and that or that 3 days out the week I had to be club security and not educator. You know what I'm saying? So they don't, like you said before, they don't have the full picture. They don't have that full picture. And you know, that they are not equipped to tell the system that they're failing. Us within the system, us within the community,
we know it. You know what? That might be the answer. And Lydia, that might be that. I mean, that really is the answer. Is you just hit it. When I was teaching, I knew what my students didn't know. I also knew who was teaching and who wasn't teaching, and the kids knew better than anybody. Mm-hmm. The kids know when they're learning and not learning. They know when they're getting education and not getting an education. Even if I had kids who couldn't stand me, couldn't stand my teaching style, couldn't stand my personality, and most certainly couldn't stand the assignments that I gave. But they never would say I'm not a good teacher or that I don't do my job or I don't teach. They didn't like me as a person, but they couldn't talk about the fact that they weren't learning something, even if they weren't doing very much, because I was teaching every single day. The opposite was also being said of people who they did like. They liked Friday movies in some classrooms. They liked being, having dead time or downtime or party time or free time. But they also will say that I'm not learning anything, or I don't like that class because I don't do anything. So I think you hit the nail on the head. When you talk about accountability, kids know when they have been taught, when they haven't been taught. That might be the game changer. It's finding a way to use honest data about perception of learning from the actual end user, the child, to really determine what may need to be and what kind of comes next. Candace says the only thing about standardized tests is that it measures the system definitions of intelligence. That's what I don't like. Every child doesn't learn the same, nor take the system. And that's the whole point of why I argue they should no longer exist. We need to move away from it and move into a different system that works for every individual person. Again, Henderson is an artist. He is an entertainer. He is a filmmaker. How he would get evaluated and how I, as an English person, the English major, would get evaluated, it should be different. We don't need the same skills at the same level for what we do every single day. Now, there are some skills that we both need: creativity, critical thinking, the ability to communicate, solve problems. Those things are for all. But we have to find a way of cultivating that and really getting to it. And then Candy, agree with you, Lydia, that's a good idea, but it's not quantitative. It probably should be used in addition to testing. That the essay should be used in addition to some kind of standardized assessment. So Henderson, do you have any final questions? I have just one final question for you, my friend.
Okay.
Do you have one for me or no? Or I can go first.
Yeah, you go first.
What are you are no longer in public education. What are you going to do to give back to education in Atlanta?
Well, as far as I guess the biggest thing that I've been wanting to do that Corona messed up is when I was an educator, I had a film festival that I did at my school. And so basically the kids would, create films, and we would have a film festival. We would bring in people from the outside film community to teach workshops. It was a competition. We had a big awards gala where the kids dressed up. So for me, I wanted to make sure, because after I left, I got calls from students, other teachers, like, "Oh, your program has gone down. Everything's aren't the same. This is in the third. Oh, we really miss you here. Is there any way you can come back? Are you sure you don't want?" You know what I'm saying? And so it's like, no, I can't come back. But what I can try to do is provide what I provided, because I love film, and provide it on a bigger scale. And so one thing I want to do for the city of Atlanta is I want to have a Atlanta Teen Film Festival.
That's a great idea. I love that. That's huge. That is needed. I'm excited about it. I will help in however I can. I think that is a great idea and a really great concept. I don't know if my friend Michael Mays was the CTAE director when you were.
He was my boss. Dr. Mays was my boss.
That's right. So now that Dr. Mays there is now the academy dedicated to him and his memory. So I'm hopeful that maybe that's something we can even incorporate and bring them into it. So that would be great. So Henderson, thank you so much. Did you come up with a final question for me?
I do have a final question for you. So what do we got to do to get you to run for office?
I am going to run when I retire. I'm going to run for state senate. I'm going to be right there to fight again. Hopefully by then there will be no Brian Kemp. There will be no, this will be a whole different state. You really will have a blue wave that will come in, and we will have purposely guided leadership in place. And regardless if it's a Republican or regardless if it's a Democrat, they are going to need peers to hold them accountable. And so I'll be holding people accountable from now until then, and hopefully and beyond. But for the immediate point in regards to politics, it's about educating, number one, but then it's about creating structures that are going to get the right people elected and encouraging young people to do the work and to do it right. And that's also a big piece of it. There's so many young people that are learning and growing in politics on social media platforms like TikTok. It's about finding those kids for me, right? Like I literally look for those kids in Atlanta, reach out to those kids and just encourage them to keep making content. Like, keep doing this, keep learning about this, keep caring about this. It isn't just one election. It's not just I'm voting for, as the kids call him, Daddy Ossoff, or I'm going to just vote for, get Trump out. It's about continuously being informed and staying informed. And as you hear things that are untrue, you have to fight it. You have to counter it, and you have to do it the right way. Today, I received a screenshot of a text. And let me tell you what and the screenshot came from a black male who is like mad at Joe Biden because he's mad at Joe Biden. And the text said the Biden administration is recklessly releasing hundreds of illegals who have COVID into Texas communities. The Biden administration must immediately end this callous act that exposes Texans and Americans to COVID-19. This was a screenshot from Instagram. The Instagram was from a trainer, a black trainer. So I called my friend and I said, number one, do you know why kids are at the border and where they came from? And I explained how you had a rush of people from Central America and Mexico to the American border, trying to escape violence, crime, mob activity in Mexico, brutality in Central America. And the Biden administration has a very hard choice to make. Are they going to send these kids back to go back through this, where kids can get kidnapped, raped, killed, or are they going to try to detain the children to then reunite them in their actual homes, find out where these kids are from, and spend money to get them back there, or bring their parents over here and find a path to citizenship? That's the big issue. But of course, he didn't know that. Then I said, do you know who Greg Abbott is? Because that's who sent the tweet. And he said, I don't know Greg Abbott. I said, look, Greg Abbott is the governor of Texas, who is a Republican, who is likely to want to run against whoever the Democratic nominee is in 2024 if Donald Trump doesn't run, who is responsible for the debacle that happened in Texas 2 weeks ago around the snowstorm, who is responsible for people in Texas right now getting $10,000 light bills. And you mean to tell me you give any credibility to his tweet? You didn't take the time to Google any of this, but yeah, you want to send it to me. But again, I don't mind, because that is the work. It is my job to educate every single person God sends my way, and just simply encourage them to use the Google to learn more. And that's what that's what it's about. And again, and you know what? Thank you so much. Texas has already been exposed. This is the man who sent this tweet, the tweeter, Greg Abbott, is the same guy who lists the mask mandate, who wants Texas to be like Georgia. COVID free. Candy likes your picture in the back as well. And so, and Lydia, thank you for joining. Thanks to everybody for joining. Henderson, thank you for joining me. I'm a fan. I want to support what you do. And anytime you have anything going, you definitely let me know. I'm 100% there, my brother. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Everybody have a great weekend. Henderson, enjoy your weekend, and congratulations again on your brand new home.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, my friend.